So my name is Ricardo Alvarez. I am the regional director for South Florida, representing the Office of the Commissioner of Agriculture, Nikki Fried.
Ricardo, thank you for your time for this interview with Industria 420,
For sure.
Industria420.com. First of all,
Con mucho gusto.
tell us about yourself, Ricardo. You work for the Department of Agriculture in Florida. You are involved with cannabis and sustainability projects since a long time ago. Tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get involved with the industry, and what are you doing right now?
Sure. Okay. For the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, I represent the Office of the Commissioner of Agriculture, Nikki Fried. And that being said, what I do is I represent her policies. And one of the policies that she set forth when she took office was our program, our hemp program. For her, it was very important to get a program that offered more availability to Floridians in the cannabis industry. And of course, the best way to do that was through hemp, which was in 2018 descheduled by the Department of Agriculture and by the United States government, making it into an agricultural commodity. That being said, I have worked in this industry since the beginning of our program. But prior to Florida, prior to our hemp program, my first involvements with cannabis or medical cannabis was as a patient grower in Oregon. Oregon, before it became recreational and highly regulated, it had a medical program that allowed for growers, for patients to have growers as well as caretakers. So it was a very interesting system that allowed somebody who had agricultural abilities like I do to help patients to grow their medicine and to make sure that they're getting healthy medicine, safe medicine for their consumption. So it was a patient collective around 24 people that I grew their medicine for and helped to make sure that they administer properly their medication and to help make sure that they had access to it without any worries, etc. That was a very beautiful moment, and that was my first introduction into the cannabis industry, if you will. After that, I basically moved back to Florida, and then little by little, I joined the Department of Agriculture and now do what I do with the hemp program.
Right now in Florida, there's regulations that allow the access to patients and the production of medical cannabis, and also there's regulations for hemp. What is the landscape of the industry, the legal cannabis industry here in Florida?
Yeah, so Florida has two cannabis programs. One is the medical cannabis program, which is overseen by the Department of Health. They write the rules for the medical cannabis program. And then we have the hemp program, which is overseen by the Department of Agriculture and regulated by the Department of Agriculture. The landscape has been interesting because we have two programs that basically work in the same area. It's the same plant with this, with similar benefits, similar uses, but they work in two different worlds. So medical cannabis, as we know, is a vertically integrated model versus our hemp program is horizontally integrated, which allows for greater access to the industry from a more diverse group of people. But the landscape as a whole, economically speaking, is doing very well. The medical cannabis is increasing its revenue. There's more interest in it. There's an increase in patient registration, which is important because medical cannabis is tied. The licensing is tied to the number of patients who are registered. But then also I could say that, for example, our hemp program has, our hemp program has created around a $370 million impact in the state of Florida. So on the hemp side of things, it continues to increase, it continues to develop. Right now, for example, with hemp, unlike with medical cannabis, hemp has the potentiality of industrial application. So right now, even with hemp, we're just touching the surface. But even with just touching the surface, we already see about a $400 million impact economically in the state, which is fantastic. So the landscape looks good, but there's just still a lot of challenges with both programs, but there's definitely still a lot of challenges that need to be tackled.
What will be, what are some of the achievements that the Florida Department of Agriculture under Commissioner Nikki Fried have obtained in this sector, in the area of medical cannabis and or hemp in Florida in the past years? What have you as an entity, as a government entity, has advanced in this area in the past years?
Well, the thing with medical cannabis is important to understand is that medical cannabis is regulated and managed through the Department of Health, which we unfortunately don't have too much, say in it. But that being said, what we do is that we do regulate the edible side of medical cannabis. So anything that's edible that is consumed by medical cannabis patients will be regulated by the Department of Agriculture because we have a division of food safety. That being said, we did a good job, I want to say, in writing the rules around edibles. So for example, on that side of things, we have that completed. We have rules that regulate edibles. In the state of Florida, for example, you have to be 21 years or older, things like that, to make sure that the products that are actually being consumed, that are being eaten, that have medical cannabis THC in it are safe to consume, et cetera, that they do have what is labeled, and making sure that labeling compliance is there. But that being said, where we have more of an impact and where we've had more of an opportunity is in hemp. Our hemp program is something that we completely regulate. We regulate at all levels: cultivation, extraction, processing, manufacturing, then the retail and the wholesale side of it as well. And in that, I mean, the impact has been enormous. We've been able to, and if I read correctly your question, where we talk about achievements, I mean, the achievements are there in the sense that we have around 800 cultivation licenses. So we have 800 cultivation licensee holders, which represents around 950 cultivation sites, which turns out to be around 20,000 acres of hemp or acreage that is registered for cultivation. With that being said, we also see that there's also about a $17 million revenue in taxes, or tax revenue that we're producing, that we're generating through this program. So the achievements are there. And not only that, but economically speaking is one thing, but I think the greater achievement is in the horizontal model, which allows us to open up the industry to anyone. With the vertical integration model, you have the problem that you are stuck, you're limited to the seed to sale part, which doesn't allow for any other entry into that value chain. But with hemp program, I think one of our greatest achievements has been opening up on a horizontal model, which allows anyone to get into the industry at any point. If you want to be a cultivator, cultivate. If you want to be a retailer, retail. If you want to wholesale, wholesale. If you want to just import and sell online, go for it. You can do that with hemp, which is fantastic. So that being said, I think opening up, which creates more social equity in the industry, has been one of our greatest achievements, as well as providing educational material, educational events, bilingual sometimes, because we want to make sure that we're getting the Hispanic community involved as well, but also reaching out to other communities that have been most affected by the war on drugs. So definitely these are pushes that Commissioner Fried wanted us to engage in and to promote, and they've been very successful.
You told me that in Florida there are more than around 800 licensed cultivators. Where those hemp grows in Florida? Where is the area where where are those cultivators? There's like is South Florida, Central Florida? Where are they?
That's a good question. I mean, I could tell you that we have licensee holders in 64 out of 67 counties in Florida. So that tells you that most of Florida has a licensee holder, which is fantastic. The thing with hemp, you know, and this is something that we see nationally as well as internationally, is that there's still a lot of figuring out to do. There's still a lot of research and study and understanding as to what genetics are useful for the different parts of hemp, whether it's medicinal or industrial, you know. And when you get into industrial, you want genetics that are specific for fiber, for the biomass, for the husk, for the cud. These are very important types of researches that are still ongoing. And then of course, making sure that you have genetics that are viable in Florida's climate, which can be challenging depending on what part. But no, definitely you see it throughout the state of Florida. There's folks trying to grow hemp in different ways throughout the state of Florida for different usage. Because remember, you have a nutritional side to hemp as well, you know, with the hemp seed, the possibility of creating hemp flour for breads and things like that, you know, that's still to come as well.
When people talks about cannabis and hemp, most of the time, everybody loses from sight that this is an agricultural issue. It's a plant,
Mhm.
and that involves practices. How do members of the industry, of the cannabis and hemp industry, can adopt the best practices through the value chain?
Every state is different, and that's usually how it is with anything really, especially when it's agriculture related. The state of Florida, the Department of Agriculture already has, through its Office of Water Policy, and that it basically provides what's called best management practices, BMPs. BMPs are a set of criterias, requirements that are focusing on water, nutrients, as well as soil, and how those are being applied, and the health of the soil. So it's something that requires farmers, especially large farmers, to adhere to and to follow, right? And they get bona fide for that, if you will. With cannabis, and I speak about this as a whole plant, hemp or medical marijuana. Cannabis is a highly regulated industry. The requirements for it are tougher than most things because this is something that is consumed by people. So of course, you know, medical cannabis like hemp, they're going to look for things like heavy metals, et cetera, make sure that there's no poisons or any kind of, you know, unnecessary products in it. We as a department, we offer our best management practices for hemp. And we also offer a guide as to what is useful or what we recommend or don't recommend for like pesticides, because we regulate pesticides here in Florida. So we put out information pamphlets on that and get everyone educated. When you become, for example, a hemp cultivator and you apply for a hemp cultivation license, you're also required to apply for the BMP program as well. And then basically within 2 years, you'll have an inspection come in to see if you've been documenting your soil, you've been documenting your water use and your nutrient use or your input use. And these are very important, but it's still something that needs to have more robust type of how can I say, oversight, in the sense of like, well, if you're a farmer who's not doing good practices or not practicing best management, then what do we do with that farmer? How do we get that farmer to comply with best management practices, or how do we you know, deal with that situation? So that's still where we're coming to, and how it's going to be implemented, because I know that the best management practices will eventually become absolute requirement for all farmers in Florida, because it deals with water usage more than anything, and water is a big deal in Florida. With your previous question, I think the more important thing is education. So educate of the farmers, of the extractors, of the manufacturers. Obviously, when you get into manufacturing or action, then there are even greater requirements for that type of situation, which have even more more compliance needs before you even get started. But that being said, education, I think, is still one of the biggest factors and the most important thing that we can put out there in getting people involved in this industry, so that they know what to grow, how to grow it, and et cetera. So that's something where we're still working on also.
How can the industry per se, the industry, the hemp and the cannabis producers start to be more sustainable in their own processes, how they can start to be like the top of the examples of what sustainability is about.
Yeah, that's a great question, and a lot of it has to do with depending on what type of cultivation you have and what kind of cannabis you're growing for what purposes. No? Um, Again, cannabis is a highly innovative, highly technical industry these days. Medical cannabis companies, large ones, they utilize systems. I mean, most of the grows are going to be indoor grows, which utilize a water reclamation system. They try to minimize their footprint as much as possible. But obviously, these are operations that require a lot of energy to have your output. No, that being said, versus let's say an outdoor grow uses less energy, things like that. With hemp, we have less of those issues. Hemp and cannabis as a whole, cannabis as a plant really isn't a plant that demands a lot of water. It's not a plant that requires a lot of inputs, a lot of pesticides or fertilizers or anything like that. It's a very easy plant to grow. Again, depending on what kind of operation you have. But with hemp grown outdoors, especially when you talk about industrial usage, right? Industrial usage doesn't require a greenhouse or an indoor cultivation site. It's going to require the outdoors. It's going to require, 1,000 to 2,000 seeds per acre, and plant is growing, tightly together. It grows tall. It's harvested just for the biomass, basically for its industrial usage. That being said, the beauty of hemp, and this is what I definitely tend to focus on is industrial hemp and the sustainability uses. So for example, hemp, when you're growing it naturally it will remediate the soil, it will clean the soil. Naturally, it'll clean the air. So we know that a hemp plant in one hemp, you can capture up to 22 tons of carbon. So for carbon sequestration, the hemp plant is one of the best forest products out there. So just alone in the act of growing it for industrial usages, you're already producing sustainability. You're sequestering carbon, you're cleaning the soil. So it's something that actually has benefits while you're producing it, which is the beauty of it all. And again, depending on what kind of application or for what you're growing it'll really depend a lot on how you're growing it. But that I like to say also that what is very encouraging about cannabis is that we see a lot of movement towards regenerative cannabis agriculture, which is, I think, amazing. It's something regenerative agriculture as a whole is becoming more popular today. And we're starting to know what if we practice more sustainable forms of agriculture. Agriculture can be a solution, not a problem when it comes down to climate change. And cannabis has a place to play in that as well. And then hemp has even more of a place in that, because hemp, you could produce, obviously you could produce bioplastics, you could produce energy from it, composites, construction materials, etc. So the opportunities there, and especially sustainable opportunities, are much greater. So definitely this is a plant that has a lot of hope to it when it comes down to sustainability goals.
Is there something else you would like to add to this interview, Ricardo?
Yeah, I like to say that Florida is a well-positioned state when it comes down to this industry. We are the gateway to Latin America. We're the fourth largest state in the country. And that's just permanent residents, not including snowbirds and tourists and everybody else. So we're well positioned for this. We're well positioned to grow hemp. We're well positioned to grow industrial hemp, medicinal hemp, and then to offer those products to Latin America. Latin America has a lot of interest in Florida and what we're doing. Florida's hemp program has also been a leader in the country when it comes down to how we implement this program and how we deal with stakeholders and how the government is actually facilitating the process for people to be in this industry. And I'm very proud of that. We've really made a very big effort to make sure that this is as easy as possible for Floridians and for anyone who wants to do business in Florida in the hemp industry. So for that, I think we're doing great. And I also like to say that, and I want to encourage anyone who's listening to this to continue looking at industrial hemp to see what possibilities are there, because they're going to be enormous. I mean, if we go back to medical cannabis just in recreational use alone, there's about, it's total globally $17 billion globally right now. That's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes down to recreational use. So for medical cannabis, for that, there's still so much more to go. And then for hemp, it's even way more to go, because we still have the industrial application that needs to be turned on. So anybody interested in doing a small business or any kind of ancillary business when it comes down to hemp or cannabis, the sky's the limits. We're ready to help you out however we can. And definitely the opportunities are there. It's not a closed industry yet, not at all.